Hi, Tropic Cinema. I wish I could be there in person. I'm so excited to have you guys sharing the film. And without further ado, I will answer these questions.
Here's the first question. Having a film accepted into the Sundance Film Festival brings with it certain expectations. This year, everything is different. How do you think this unique version of the festival changes things?
Yes, this year everything is different, and I have to say it's almost hard to imagine just how different it will be. But my hope is that for all the filmmakers, that this kind of unique way of sharing films will actually benefit the filmmaker, hopefully, in a way by zeroing in attention truly to the work and the craft of all the filmmakers, and maybe some of the hubbub that distracts from it won't be there. I mean, maybe that's one silver lining. But I hope the best for all the filmmakers participating.
Well, I think it's a very exciting year to be a part of Sundance. Sundance is always on the forefront of independent film in the US. And as we know, it's a very competitive film festival for filmmakers to get into. This year, there's an even smaller slate, so it's an even greater honor to be chosen in this competitive year. And I think that audiences can be rest assured that they're really seeing a very distinguished group of films, and it's all the more reason to tune in to the festival.
For me, the incredible thing about this year's festival is the accessibility that's been created by having to move to a virtual forum. I'm excited that there's an opportunity for the premiere of the film to be seen by a wider audience.
Question number 2. The novelist Henry James talks about the germ of a story, a single phrase, sentence, anecdote that sparks the creation of a novel. Borrowing this notion from James, describe what led you to make your film. You know, as I think back on it and all the projects I've been involved in, I realize what I'm drawn to are things or stories that are unexpected, hopeful things happening in unlikely ways or in likely places. And looking at today's mental health crisis through the eyes of police officers is unexpected. And I felt like it was an interesting way to tell a complicated story that might open people up to kind of different perspectives on this issue that impacts all of us.
Well, a little bit about myself that can hopefully set some context. My parents emigrated from Malta in the late 1980s to the United States, and I was born shortly thereafter. But we always kept very close ties with the island. The rest of our family remained there, and so we tried to get back as often as we could. And from a very early age, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and as far back as I can remember, Malta just inspired my creative side, and as early as I wanted to make films, I wanted to make them in my family's homeland. When it came time to make Luzzu, I should say that prior to starting the film, I knew nothing about fishing at all. I'd never even gone fishing in my life, and would often get seasick. I was nevertheless inspired and had always been really captured by this beautiful and eclipsing way of life of the traditional fishermen in Malta. When I started to do my research, I saw that the things that I wondered about in my own life, questions about family, fate, and sacrifice, that these same things were weighing on many fishermen. This was at a time in my life when I was starting to grasp the idea of having my own family, and that I wondered what aspects of my heritage would be passed on to the next generation. As I spoke to fishermen, I noticed that they were approaching the same questions and almost running in the opposite direction. Most fishermen were determined that their way of life would not continue into the next generation. They saw the writing on the wall for their imperiled trade and were trying to do everything that they could to save their children from following into the fishing trade. I was struck by this, partially because there was a lack of sentimentality about it, but also that just beneath the surface you could tell that there was this enormous amount of pain. that this beautiful craft that had been passed down for centuries was finally coming to an end. And this seemed so rife for dramatic possibility, and at the same time, it really touched on something that I could relate to, and the experience of an immigrant family, and making questions about, or questioning the aspect of making sacrifices about your heritage and what you're willing to forsake so that your children can thrive in a new kind of world.
So many things led me to this story, but if there was one single thing that started this journey, it'd have to be the increased presence of law enforcement on the border.
Question 3, what challenges were there in getting the film made, and what was the biggest surprise you had in making it?
There's so many challenges in the process to making a documentary. For this film in particular, I'd have to say the pandemic and how it affected our post-production.
The biggest challenge, I'd say, like with almost every documentary film, is funding. It always takes a lot longer than you think. And I think there was kind of an unspoken question that people had about what do 2 white police officers from Texas possibly have to tell us about empathy and human connection. But I think once people saw the footage, saw the characters, they understood what I was trying to do, and we were able to overcome that. The surprises, I'd have to say the biggest surprise probably was access. I was able to have some pretty amazing access, and that really helped with my ability to tell the story. And the other really beautiful surprise was how open and transparent and trusting my subjects were with me in terms of telling the story. And the other surprise, which was really unexpected but terrific, was the humor that we found while filming. And the humor was kind of a way for Ernie and Joe to debrief from their stressful days, and it also gives the viewer a chance to have a breather in this very intense topic and emotional topic. So I guess those were the main surprises.
Well, pitching this film was a tall order. To give you an example, the film always started with Jesmark, the main character, at sea fishing. I knew that this would be very interesting to watch and cinematic, and that the whole film would have a strong visual language. But on the page, it just said, exterior, daytime, Jesmark fishes. So I can't really begrudge the financiers who looked at this rather simple script and said, this doesn't really look like much. To my credit, I hope that the best parts of the film are really purely cinematic, and that, in a sense, they can't really be captured with the written word. But beyond the initial pitching phases, we continue to run into financing problems. The prospects for a film like this are always going to be limited, but I certainly did not make things any easier. I insisted on using non-actor fishermen rather than casting a traditional actor with a resume or some kind of bankability, if such a thing exists. And I insisted on using the Maltese language, which is spoken in exactly one place on Earth. So couple those aspects with the fact that I had never directed a film and that there was no real cinematic track record coming out of Malta. There was no prior film that had succeeded internationally that we could point to as a sign for our success. With those headwinds against us, we nevertheless committed to making the film. We came very close to pushing the shooting from the fall of 2019 to the spring of 2020. And thank God we didn't do that, or else I would not be here with you today. I credit my wonderful producing partners in Malta, Rebecca Anastasi and Oliver Malia, as well as my filmmaking mentor and producer in the United States, Ramin Barani, with standing behind me the whole way and pushing this project to its completion. I'm happy to be standing at this point and looking back now. It seems almost like a dream to be at the stage. We had our artistic convictions about how we wanted to make the film, and we knew that we would find some kind of audience somewhere, but it has surprised me how quickly and how kind of far the film has traveled. I never expected that one of our very first audiences would be all the way in Key West, Florida, but it's amazing, and I hope it's a sign that the film can continue to travel far beyond the coastlines of our Mediterranean island.
Question 4. What inspired you to become a filmmaker? Were there movies that you loved as a kid, or was it something you saw later that resonated or influenced you?
I didn't grow up wanting to be a filmmaker. I think it's just been a natural evolution. I studied journalism in undergrad and then worked at newspapers. Eventually, that curiosity and desire to tell stories led to documentary filmmaking.
Um, I think I became a filmmaker actually because I love to tell stories and I love stories. Too many influences to mention in terms of things that impacted me in terms of film. But what I will say is that I really prefer films that immerse me in a story, immerse me in a character, rather than preaching to me. Even if I agree with what's being preached to me, I don't want to be preached to. I want to be in that story or totally immersed in that world. So that's probably what's had the biggest impact for me.
Well, growing up, I knew almost nothing about filmmaking. I had no connection to the film world. And where I grew up in semi-rural Minnesota, there was nothing like tropic cinema. There was no art house cinema of any kind. Um, but at a young age, I requisitioned the family video camera and started making documentaries. Some of my earliest documentary explorations actually were in Malta. I started just kind of discovering the world and my voice through the camera that felt very comfortable to me. But it wasn't until I went to college where I was able to see and get to know world cinema. And it was there that I saw the films of the post-war Italian neorealist filmmakers, and those had a profound impact. They were foundational inspirations to me. The films of Visconti and De Sica and Rossellini. And I have to say that probably one of the biggest reasons that those films struck me is that the characters, the scenarios, the locations looked like family photos come to life. Photos from my parents' childhood and from my grandparents' life in the post-war period of Malta, which was bombed heavily in World War II. Suddenly, I, for the first time ever, felt like I had a connection, a deep connection to a kind of movie, and it almost looked like my grandparents and my aunts and uncles were kind of populating the background of these Italian neorealism films. It also made me wonder why Malta had never made those films. And as I dug deeper, I kind of realized that Malta was really a neighbor to so many wonderful cinematic traditions, but never had a real industry of its own. And it made me miss what we could have gotten from those films from that period that were never made. The films of Italian realism also are particularly moving because they're not just artistic expressions, but they adopt an ethical approach that elevates them beyond ordinary works of cinema. They give testament to the lives of ordinary people. They shoot on the street in real locations, and they use non-actors, real people, playing versions of themselves. These films were timely and vital, and they offered personal reflections, but also participated in a kind of national reckoning. I'm particularly moved by the ways in which these films culminate, in that they build towards great emotional heights, but they spare us of moral judgments. What seems to happen to the heroes of neorealism always is left in the audience's hands. And I'm really drawn to that openness. I think that the audience should participate in the films as much as possible, and it's something that I hope we were able to capture in Luzzu, and that maybe some of that energy from the Italian neorealism films can find new life in this film in Malta, which is just on the doorstep of that tradition. So thank you so much for inviting me to share these reflections on Luzzu. Thank you to our partners, Tropic Cinema and Sundance Film Festival. This is an extraordinary opportunity. I'm so glad to share the film with you, and I hope you've enjoyed it.